The problem with the lighting rig had started at 8:47 in the evening, 3 minutes before the keynote address was scheduled to begin, and Marcus Cole had fixed it in 11 minutes flat. He had not announced himself when he arrived. He came through the service entrance the way he always came, through the door that opened into the kitchen corridor, past the stacked linen carts and the cold smell of industrial cleaning fluid, with his toolbox in one hand and Lily against his shoulder with the other. The hotel's facilities manager met him at the entrance with the expression of a man who had already apologized to everyone he needed to apologize to, and now just needed the problem to disappear. Marcus listened to the description of the issue for exactly 45 seconds, identified the likely cause, and told the manager where to put Lily while he worked. She was 8 years old and had been asleep since the car, her small head tipped sideways, one hand still loosely holding the strap of her backpack the way children held things in sleep, not gripping, but not letting go. He had not planned to bring her. His sitter had called at 7 with a flat tire and no way to get there, and Marcus had done what he always did when plans fell apart. He adjusted. He settled Lily into a folding chair near the service entrance, tucked her coat around her like a blanket, and set her thermos of warm milk within reach of her hand. Then he went to work. He was still in his work clothes. Dark coveralls, scuffed steel-toed boots, a gray thermal underneath that had been washed so many times the cuffs had gone soft. There had been no time to change and no reason to. He was not a guest. He was the man who fixed things. The room he walked into when the facilities manager led him through the side corridor was exactly the kind of room he had spent his adult life entering without being seen. Chandeliers overhead, each one throwing warm light across tablecloths that cost more to launder than most people paid for dinner. The low, well-considered sound of a string quartet near the entrance, 300 people in formal clothes, moving through the kind of easy, practiced conversation that happened when the price of a plate was $10,000 and everyone in the room already knew each other from previous rooms exactly like this one. The Harrington Foundation Annual Gala. He had seen the banner when he pulled into the parking structure. He had noted it the way he noted all information, without reacting to it, without ceremony, and moved on. He fixed the lighting panel in 11 minutes. Faulty relay in the secondary circuit, the kind of thing that looked alarming to people who didn't know what they were looking at, and was clean and simple to someone who did. He replaced the part, confirmed the response across all 3 control zones, repacked his tools, collected the facilities manager's initials on the work order slip, and started back toward the service corridor. Toward Lily, toward the drive home and the invoices he still needed to review before morning. He had crossed perhaps 20 feet of the ballroom's edge when a woman's voice stopped him. "Excuse me?" 2 words. But the way they were placed, the weight of them, the particular quiet certainty, left no ambiguity about what they were for. They did not mean, "excuse me," the way people said it in crowded hallways. They meant something closer to, "Who let you in here, and why are you still standing in my event?" Marcus turned. Claire Harrington was exactly as she appeared in the occasional photograph that ran in the city paper's business section. Mid-30s. Poised in the way that required significant ongoing effort to maintain and had been maintained so consistently that the effort no longer showed. She wore something deep burgundy that was expensive without announcing itself. She was looking at Marcus the way a person looked at a structural problem they had just noticed and were preparing to address efficiently. "Service staff use the East Corridor," she said. Her voice did not rise. She was too practiced for that. But it carried across the nearest 2 tables, across the couple who had just sat down with fresh champagne, across the event photographer who had been framing a shot near the centerpiece arrangement and had now gone completely still. "I'm not service staff," Marcus said. "I'm the contractor your facilities team called in for the lighting issue. The issue has been resolved 45 minutes ago. Then I'm not sure why you're still standing in my ballroom." My ballroom. 2 words that told Marcus everything he needed to understand about the shape of the next several minutes. "I was on my way out," he said. "You came through the main corridor," Claire said. Something in her voice had shifted. It had acquired the particular quality of a person who has decided that a thing is not merely inconvenient but worth addressing fully, in public, where the correction could be properly observed. Past the guest entrance. One of my staff mentioned it. That entrance is for guests, not for contractors. I don't know who let you through that way, but this is a private event and the people in this room have paid to be here. The conversations at the nearest tables had thinned to nothing. People were not turning their heads, but they were not looking elsewhere either. I came through the service entrance, Marcus said. I used the access corridor because it's the most direct route to the exit. I wasn't aware I was inconveniencing anyone. You walked through my event in work coveralls. She said it the way people said things they believed to be self-evidently conclusive. A statement of fact that was also a verdict. These guests did not spend their evenings getting dressed and coming here to look at. She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. The sentence finished itself in the silence she left for it, and every person within 30 feet heard the ending she had chosen not to say aloud, which landed considerably harder than if she had said it. I apologize for the disruption, Marcus said. His voice was even. Not cold. Not tight with the effort of being even. Simply level, the way a thing was level when it had been that way for a long time. I'll be on my way. You'll also want to understand, Claire continued, and the word understand came out with a particular weight, the weight of someone who had decided the lesson was as important as the correction, that events like this represent a significant investment of trust. When our donors arrive at a gala and encounter someone wandering through in, she gestured briefly toward his coveralls. It affects the atmosphere. It affects the experience these people came here for. It's nothing personal. It's about standards. Nothing personal. Marcus stood in the center of that sentence and felt its exact weight. He had heard versions of it before, in places and contexts that would have made everyone in this ballroom deeply uncomfortable to imagine. Spoken by people who genuinely believed that the impersonal framing of a humiliation somehow softened it. What it actually did, he had come to understand, was relieve the speaker of any obligation to examine what they were doing. If it wasn't personal, it required no reflection. It was simply policy. He looked at Claire Harrington steadily. He gave her the same attention he gave to most things, complete, direct, and without any performance of what he was thinking behind it. The work is done, he said. Your event can proceed. He turned toward the service corridor. I didn't excuse you, Claire said. The room went very quiet. Marcus stopped. He did not turn immediately. He stood with his back to the room and the toolbox in his hand, and something moved through him that was not anger and was not hurt, but was something older and more worn than either. The specific, familiar weight of a man who had been in enough rooms, in enough cities, in enough uniforms, to know exactly what kind of moment this was, and who had long since stopped being surprised when it came for him in places where it had no business coming. He turned back. Then I'll wait, he said quietly, for you to excuse me. Something moved through Claire's expression. Something small and fast, the flicker of a person who had written a scene in their head and has just been handed a different one. From the far end of the head table on the dais, a man who had been sitting very still for the past several minutes set down his water glass. He was in his middle 70s, white-haired, with the upright and particular posture of someone whose body had memorized a way of holding itself decades ago and had simply never stopped. He had the kind of face that had done a great deal of looking at things without reacting to them, and he was looking at Marcus Cole now with an expression that was not recognizing a stranger. He was recognizing someone he knew. More precisely, he was recognizing something he knew. A scar that ran along the inside of Marcus's right forearm, visible where the coverall sleeve had ridden up slightly when he shifted the toolbox. A long, pale, irregular ridge of healed tissue that ran from the wrist toward the elbow. The kind of wound that did not come from an accident, or a fall, or the ordinary categories of damage. The kind of wound that came from fragmented metal traveling at high velocity. From a specific category of violence that Brigadier General Robert Harrington, United States Army, retired, understood from personal experience. He had last seen that scar on the morning of February 9, 2013, in the back of a medical evacuation helicopter somewhere over Helmand Province, when the man it belonged to had been unconscious on a litter beside him, and General Harrington had spent 41 minutes of that flight pressing a field dressing against the wound and asking a man he barely knew to please stay with him. He pushed back his chair and stood up. Before that night was over, 300 people in formal clothes would watch a retired brigadier general cross 60 feet of ballroom floor, come to attention in front of a repairman in dark coveralls, and raise his hand in a salute that required no explanation. And the room would understand, all at once, in the way that rooms understood things when someone with authority simply showed them the truth, exactly what it had just witnessed. If stories about dignity, about what the world assumes and what it misses, stay with you, you're in the right place. Subscribe and stick with us. Marcus Cole had a system for weekdays, and it never changed. He was up at 5, because 15 years out of the Army, his body still understood 5 o'clock as the correct place to begin. He made coffee in the kitchen while the apartment was dark. He reviewed the crew schedules for the electrical contracting company he ran. 2 part-time technicians, 1 van that needed new belts before the cold came, and a set of service contracts that kept the lights on and not much more. He checked the inbox for new requests. He packed Lily's lunch before she woke, because Lily woke at 6:30 with the complete and immediate alertness of a child who treated sleep as a temporary inconvenience she was always slightly relieved to be done with. She was 8 years old, or nearly. She had her mother's eyes and her mother's habit of saying exactly what she meant without softening at first, and she had something that was purely her own. A slow, serious kind of curiosity that processed things at its own pace and returned to questions days after they were first asked, once they had been properly considered. Marcus found this both deeply familiar and quietly humbling. She reminded him, regularly and without intending to, that most things deserved more thought than he gave them. He had moved them to the apartment 3 years after his wife died. He had sold the house not because the mortgage had become a problem, but because every room in it had a particular history attached to it, and he needed rooms that were only rooms for a while. He had not explained this to anyone. He did not explain himself much, in general. It was not a habit he had chosen. It was simply the shape his personality had taken over a long time spent in places where what you did was the only thing that mattered, and what you said about it was almost always beside the point. The electrical contracting work was not what anyone who had known his previous life would have predicted for him. He had earned the certification in the 2 years after his separation from service, sitting in community college classrooms with students 15 years younger than him, working through the coursework with the same methodical patience he had applied to everything he had ever been asked to learn. He was good at the work. He started at the beginning of a problem and did not stop until it was solved. He charged fair rates. His clients referred him to other clients. He kept the books himself on Sunday evenings after Lily was in bed, and he did not think about the career trajectory that the referrals would have predicted for a different kind of man in a different kind of life. He was not a man who planned much further than the next invoice. There was a scar along the inside of his right forearm that ran from the wrist toward the elbow in a pale, irregular line. People noticed it. He noticed them noticing. He said nothing about it, and over time he had learned that the silence itself was enough to redirect most conversations somewhere less complicated. The call from the Meridian Grand's facilities manager had come in at 7:48 on a Thursday evening, while Marcus was finishing the dinner dishes and Lily was at the kitchen table completing a science project involving a potato, 2 copper rods, and a small LED light she had been determined to power for 3 days. He had listened to the problem in the hallway, confirmed the rate including emergency premium, and asked how quickly they needed him there. They had said immediately, which was the answer he had expected, because that was always the answer when someone with a 300-person event lost their lighting control panel with the keynote 45 minutes away. He had looked through the kitchen doorway at his daughter, and the potato, and the focused, slightly frustrated expression of a child who was very close to solving something. He had said, "Lily, get your coat." She had gotten her coat without asking why. That was one of the things he loved most about her. The Meridian Grand was the kind of building that announced itself half a block before you reached it. Marcus had been inside it twice before on other jobs, and both times he had come through the same service entrance on the east side, past the loading dock and the kitchen exhaust and the two porters sharing a cigarette near the dumpster enclosure, through the door that was propped open specifically because people like him came and went through it at all hours without ceremony. He knew these entrances the way he knew the back geometry of most places he worked. The location of the junction boxes and the HVAC access panels and the service corridors that ran beneath the parts of buildings where people paid attention. He had spent a significant portion of his working life in these spaces. He did not find them diminishing. He found them honest. The work that kept a building running happened here, in the places no one thought to mention in a brochure. He had noted the Gala banner in the parking structure without reaction. The Harrington Foundation Annual Gala, 11th year. He knew the name from the city paper's business section the way most people in the city knew it, vaguely, from occasional proximity to things worth noting, without any personal stake in the details. The foundation raised money for children's medical research. The family behind it ran a diversified holdings company out of a building 12 blocks east. The CEO had taken over from her father 6 years ago when he retired. He knew none of this when he walked in. He learned the relevant parts from the facilities manager during the 90-second walk to the rigging bay, and he retained what was useful and let the rest go. The ballroom was visible through the access panel as he worked. 300 guests at 40 tables. The kind of formal arrangement that had taken 2 full days to assemble and would be disassembled in 4 hours once the last guest left. A dais at the far end with a podium and a long head table where the foundation's officers sat. An event photographer moving through the room with the practiced invisibility of someone who had learned to be present without intruding. Marcus understood that kind of invisibility. He had spent years building it deliberately in contexts that had nothing to do with electrical work. The fault was exactly where he expected it. A failed relay in the secondary circuit, the kind of failure that cascaded visibly but was isolated at its source, straightforward to any technician who knew the sequence. He replaced the relay, tested the zones in order, confirmed full response, and repacked his tools with the unhurried efficiency of a man who had done this several thousand times and had stopped finding it interesting approximately 2,000 times ago. 11 minutes. He collected the work order slip. He started back toward Lily. He had crossed roughly 20 feet of the ballroom's edge when Claire Harrington said, "Excuse me," behind him, and what followed unfolded with the particular inexorability of things that have been set in motion by assumptions made too quickly and held too firmly to be revised in time. She was standing where the nearest table's edge met the open floor, positioned with the ease of a woman who had spent her entire professional life at the center of rooms that were organized around her presence. Her expression, when she looked at Marcus, moved through several things in rapid sequence: assessment, classification, and the arrival at a conclusion that felt to her entirely obvious. He told her he was the contractor. She told him the East Corridor was for service staff. He told her the issue had been resolved. She told him she wasn't sure why he was still standing in her ballroom. And then, because Claire Harrington was not the kind of person who left things half-addressed, she told him about standards. The conversations at the 4 nearest tables had thinned to silence. The photographer had lowered her camera. A woman in a red dress 3 tables back had turned completely in her chair. Marcus listened to all of it. He did not interrupt. He did not shift his expression or move his weight or perform any of the things people performed when they were deciding how to respond to being addressed this way in a room full of witnesses. He simply stood where he was standing and gave her his full, undivided, undemonstrative attention, and when she finished, he said that he would be on his way. He turned. She told him she hadn't excused him. He told her he would wait, and something in the quality of that, the absence of apology, the absence of deference, the complete and unhurried refusal to perform the thing the moment had been designed to produce, moved through the room in a way that nothing Claire Harrington had said had moved through it. People felt it before they understood it. The particular silence that fell was not the silence of tension. It was the silence of a room that had just realized it might have been reading the situation incorrectly. At the head table, General Robert Harrington had been watching for approximately 3 minutes. He had watched because he was a man who had spent a career watching, assessing rooms, assessing people, assessing the gap between what was being said and what was actually happening. And what was happening here had a shape he recognized, but it was the forearm that made him stand up. When Marcus shifted the toolbox and the coverall sleeve moved, the scar caught the light. That long pale ridge along the inside of the right arm. The specific topography of fragmented metal moving through soft tissue at speed, the kind of wound that left a particular signature that anyone who had been in those rooms, in those conditions, on those particular mornings, would recognize across any distance, in any clothing, at any age. General Harrington had last seen that scar at altitude, in a medical evacuation helicopter, with his own hands pressed against it. He had been talking to the man it belonged to for 41 minutes of that flight, and the man had not responded, and Robert Harrington had not known until they landed whether any of those 41 minutes of talking had mattered to anyone but himself. He stood up from the head table and crossed the ballroom floor. He moved with the measured, deliberate pace of a man who had arrived at destinations under conditions that made urgency feel like a category error, and who had never since lost the habit of that particular quality of movement. The room shifted around him the way rooms shifted around people whose bearing communicated, without announcement, that something worth watching was happening. Claire turned when she heard his footsteps and found her father 6 feet behind her. "Dad, step back," he said. Not unkind, not a reprimand. Simply the most direct thing available to say, said exactly the way he meant it, with nothing around it. She stepped back. General Harrington stopped 3 feet from Marcus. He looked at the scar for one more second, confirming what he already knew. Then he looked at Marcus's face. Marcus looked back at him. The particular quality of that exchange, two men locating each other across the ordinary distance of a ballroom, across 11 years and 2 entirely different lives, across the accumulated distance of a morning that neither of them had left entirely, was not something that could be narrated from the outside. The room felt it without being able to name it. The way rooms felt things that happened in a register beyond explanation. "Sergeant Cole," the general said, his voice carried. He had not tried to make it carry. The room had simply gone quiet enough for it to. Marcus looked at him. He searched the older man's face with the focused attention of someone cross-referencing something he had not thought about in a long time. And then something in his expression arrived somewhere. Not surprise, not emotion, but the quiet, complete acknowledgement of a man who has found something he was not expecting, and has decided in the same instant how to meet it. "Sir," Marcus said. The word came out automatically, the way things came out when they had been encoded into the body below the level of conscious choice, simple, correct, carrying the weight of a habit formed in places and under conditions that had made it mean something. General Robert Harrington took one step back. He brought his feet together with the precise, unhurried motion of a man performing something that was not a performance. He raised his right hand to his forehead. He held the salute. The room went completely still. Not the partial quiet of before, complete stillness, of the kind that fell when something happened that nobody present had a prior category for. The string quartet, stationed near the entrance and apparently uncertain about everything, had stopped mid-phrase. The photographer, who had raised her camera on instinct 30 seconds ago, heard her own shudder before she fully understood what she was photographing. Near the service corridor door, Lily had woken up. She had come awake the way she always came awake, all at once, with the immediate and complete alertness of a child who did not believe in transitions. She had found her father across the room and tracked the situation with the methodical patience of a person who took things seriously and did not accept incomplete information. She had stayed in the chair because he had told her to stay in the chair. She had watched. She watched the old man raise his hand to his forehead and hold it there. She watched her father stand very still and look at the old man with an expression she had never seen on him before. Not quite, not exactly. It was closest to the expression he wore on the rare occasions when someone said something that was so precisely true that he had nothing to add to it. She did not know yet what a salute meant, but she understood what the old man's face looked like. She had seen that quality of expression before, on faces in different contexts, and she knew what it was. It was the look of someone who meant something completely. Not for the room, not for any audience, simply and entirely for the man standing in front of him. She understood that the old man was not performing. Marcus held himself still for 3 seconds. Then he brought his right hand up. The salute he returned was not the reflex of ceremony. It was the reflex of a man whose body had spent years encoding certain responses below the level of thought, and for whom this particular response carried a weight that had not diminished with time or distance or 11 years of a quieter life. He held it for the full length it deserved. Then he lowered his hand. General Harrington lowered his. And then, because 300 people were standing in a silence that needed something to fill it, and because Robert Harrington had spent 35 years understanding that the truth told plainly was always more useful than the truth withheld for the sake of comfort, he turned to face the room. He did not move to the podium. He did not reach for a microphone. He stood where he was standing, in the center of the floor between the chandeliers and the white linen tables, and he spoke in the voice that had been designed over the course of an entire career to carry an open air. In February of 2013, he said, "I was attached to an advisory unit in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. Our convoy was ambushed on a secondary road outside Sangin district. 3 vehicles, 2 disabled in the first exchange, the third on fire." He paused for exactly the length of a breath. Private First Class Emery was trapped in the second vehicle. I was in the third, driver's side door jammed against a collapsed wall, couldn't get myself out. The room remained completely still. Somewhere near the entrance, someone had set down a glass of champagne on a table, and it had made a small sound, and that sound had been the last sound in the room. Sergeant First Class Marcus Cole was in the lead vehicle. He was already out when the secondary device detonated. He went toward the convoy instead of away from it. Another pause. He got Emery out of the second vehicle first. Emery had a broken leg and couldn't move independently. He carried him to cover and went back in. The general's jaw moved slightly before he continued. He came to the third vehicle while it was burning. He got the door open. He got me out. The vehicle was fully involved in fire within 25 seconds of us reaching distance. In the 4th row from the dais, a man in his 60s had set both hands flat on the table and was sitting with the particular stillness of someone who has stopped making any effort to appear unaffected. Sergeant Cole received the Distinguished Service Cross for those actions. General Harrington said. He was subsequently nominated for the Medal of Honor. He separated from the Army in 2016. He looked at Marcus. "I have not seen him since the evacuation flight." He turned back to the room one final time. "He came here tonight to fix your lights." He let that sit for exactly the length it needed to sit. He was on his way out when my daughter suggested his presence in this room was a problem. Claire Harrington was standing exactly where she had been standing since her father crossed the floor. She had not moved. Her expression had moved through a number of things since the general stood up, and it had arrived, now, at something that was neither anger nor embarrassment, but was quieter and harder than either. The specific and irreversible recognition of a person who has said something in public that they cannot take back, and who is in the process of understanding the full weight of what they said. She was not a cruel person. Marcus had understood this from the first sentence she had spoken to him. She was a person who had looked at a man in work coveralls in her ballroom and processed the available information and arrived at a conclusion that had felt to her completely reasonable. The conclusion had been wrong, not because of who Marcus was, because of the method, the act of arriving at a conclusion about a person from the surface of them, quickly and completely, without leaving any space for what the surface might not be showing you. It was a thing people did constantly, in every room, in every city, and it was only fully visible as an error in moments exactly like this one, when the surface turned out to be covering something the world had already decided was worth standing up for. That was what sat heaviest. Not the specific error but the ease of it. How little it had cost her to make it, and how much it had cost the man on the other side. A woman near the back of the room had both hands pressed against her mouth. The photographer was standing with her camera at her side. Several people had their phones out, not lifted, not recording demonstratively, just held in their hands in the unconscious way people held things when they didn't know what else to do with them. At the chair near the service door, Lily had pulled her coat tighter with both small hands and was watching her father with the expression she wore when something was being filed away permanently. Marcus did not speak for a long moment after the general finished. When he did, it was not to the room. It was to the man in front of him. "I didn't do it for a medal," he said. His voice was the same voice it had been all evening, quiet, level, without any space in it for performance. "Emery had a daughter. He'd shown me the photograph on the flight over, and you were still in that vehicle." General Harrington looked at him steadily across the distance between them. "I know," he said. "I've always known that." Marcus gave a single nod. Small, complete. The nod of a man confirming that the account between them was settled and had always been settled and required nothing further said about it. Then he looked at Claire Harrington. She was looking back at him. She did not look away. She had enough character for that much, and Marcus had noticed it from the beginning. The way she had stood fully inside the confrontation rather than softening it or walking it back once the room began to read it differently. Whatever she was not someone who required other people to look away first. "I owe you an apology," she said. Her voice was not unsteady. She had enough control for that. But something underneath the control was different from the voice she had used earlier, stripped of the particular authority that came from certainty, from the ease of a person who had never had substantial reason to question the accuracy of their first impressions. Not just for tonight, for the kind of thinking that made tonight possible. Marcus looked at her. He gave her the same full, undivided attention he gave everything, without offering her any particular comfort inside it. "I hear you," he said. That was all. He did not release her from anything, and he did not extend anything beyond acknowledgement. It was not coldness. It was the recognition that an apology received was not the same as a debt cleared, and that pretending otherwise would have been its own kind of lie. He turned for the last time toward the service corridor door. He pushed it open and held it with his foot. Lily had already slid off the chair. She crossed the space between them with the careful, deliberate pace of a child who was trying very hard not to run and mostly succeeding, and she pressed against his side with both arms around his waist and her face tucked against his jacket. Marcus wrapped one arm around her shoulders and picked up his toolbox with the other. "Daddy?" she said, muffled against the fabric. "Who was that man?" "Old friend," Marcus said. She leaned back far enough to look up at him. Her eyes were serious and fully awake. "Did he know you from the army?" "Yeah," Marcus said. "He did." She turned this over with the methodical patience she brought to most things. "Is that why he did the hand thing?" "That's called a salute," Marcus said. "It means you respect someone." She considered this carefully, the way she considered everything worth considering. Then, "Do you respect him back?" Marcus looked down at his daughter. Her mother's eyes, her own particular kind of serious, the specific and irreplaceable fact of her. "Yeah, baby," he said. "I do." She nodded. Once, the decisive little nod she gave when something had been settled to her satisfaction. She settled back against his side. They stood in the doorway together for a moment. The kitchen corridor behind them, the ballroom ahead, the sound of 300 people beginning, very slowly, to remember how to breathe. Marcus let the door fall closed, and they walked out. Behind them, the general had returned to the head table. He sat down slowly and picked up his water glass and looked at it for a long moment without drinking. His daughter came to stand beside him, and neither of them said anything, and the silence between them was not empty. It was full of the specific weight that settled between a parent and a child when the child had seen, in public and in real time, the shape of something the parent had understood long ago but could not have made them understand through explanation alone. Some things could only be witnessed. The event coordinator returned to the podium. The string quartet resumed. The evening continued. But something in the room had changed. Changed in the irreversible way of rooms that had witnessed something true. And the change did not leave with the last guest, or the cleared dessert plates, or the breakdown crew that arrived at midnight with their cart trolleys and their work lights. It went home with the people who had been present, into their cars and their conversations on the drive home, into the things they found themselves saying to each other and the things they couldn't quite assemble into sentences, into the morning that followed when some of them tried to describe to people who hadn't been there what exactly it was they had seen. It was difficult to describe. It was the kind of thing that was difficult to describe. A man had come to fix the lights, someone had told him he didn't belong in the room, and an old soldier had stood up from a table set with crystal and white linen, walked across 60 feet of ballroom floor, and proved, without argument and without a single word of correction, exactly how wrong that was. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon, Marcus's phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. He let it go to voicemail, listened to it that evening after Lily was in bed, and sat with his phone in his hand for a moment after the message ended. Claire Harrington's voice on the recording was different from the voice she had used in the ballroom. Quieter, less managed. She was calling to ask whether his company would consider taking on the Harrington Foundation building's electrical maintenance contract. A full-year service agreement. She named a rate that was fair and then some. The rate she should have been offering from the beginning if she was being honest, which she said she was trying to be. She had spoken with the facilities director. She had also spoken with her father, at length, the morning after the gala. She said one more thing before she ended the call. She said that she had spent the past 3 weeks thinking about the word standards, what it actually meant and what she had been using it to mean, and that she was still working on the difference. Marcus listened to the message twice. Then he set the phone on the table. He thought about his father, who had worked night shift at a utility substation for 24 years and come home every morning carrying something that had never quite left him. Not bitterness. His father had not been a bitter man. Something quieter than that. The specific weight of a man who had done serious work in the dark and come into the light every morning to find that the light did not remember what the dark had held. His father had given him a lot of things over the years. What he had given him most usefully was not an explanation of that weight, but an example of how to carry it without letting it become the thing you were. Marcus called Claire Harrington back the next morning. He said yes to the contract. He did not mention the part of her message about standards. He figured she was still working through it, and that the working through was hers to do, and that the most honest thing he could offer was to let her do it. The card arrived on a Thursday afternoon in early December. Plain white envelope, no return address on the front. His name written in the careful, unhurried handwriting of someone who had started the lettering over at least once before getting it right. He turned it over and found, on the back flap, a name and a street address written in the same hand, General Robert Harrington, Ret. Inside was a single sheet of plain white paper, folded once, handwritten, brief. The way things were brief when they had been held for a long time and finally set down. It said, "I have been meaning to write this letter for 11 years. I did not know where to send it. I am glad I finally know. What you did that morning was beyond what was asked of you, or expected of you, or required. It was simply what you chose to do when the moment came. I have not forgotten a single detail of it. I never will. Thank you, Sergeant." Marcus read it standing at the kitchen counter. He read it twice. Then he folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer where he kept the things that mattered. Lily's birth certificate, his discharge papers, the photograph of his wife taken the summer before she got sick, the last birthday card she had sent him from the hospital, which he had never been able to move somewhere he could see it every day but could not bring himself to put anywhere he couldn't reach it. The letter went in with the rest, into the company of the things he kept because they were true, and because they were his, and because some things deserved to be held somewhere safe even when you never looked at them directly. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway 20 minutes later, already dressed for school, backpack on with one strap twisted the wrong way. She looked at him with the assessing calm of a child taking a reading. "You okay?" she asked. He looked at his daughter, her mother's eyes, her own particular and irreplaceable way of standing in a doorway and asking a question that was actually 2 questions, the one she said and the one she meant underneath it. "Yeah," he said, "I'm good." She gave a single nod. Her nod, the one she gave when something had been confirmed, and reached up to deal with the twisted strap herself. Marcus crossed the kitchen and helped her with it. She let him, and then they went out into the morning, the same as always, Marcus with his keys and his coffee and the invoice list he would look at in the truck. Lily with her backpack sitting correctly now, one hand finding his in the ordinary automatic way of a child who knew where safety was, and had never had occasion to question it. The morning did not know his name. The street did not know what had happened in that ballroom 3 weeks ago. Nobody outside the apartment building watched them walk to the truck or noted that the man in the plain jacket and the work boots was carrying something the world had already decided was worth standing up for. That was exactly the way he had always wanted it. The world makes up its mind about you before you open your mouth, before you show it what you have done, before you tell it what you have survived. It looks at the surface of you, and it reaches its conclusion, and it does not wait around to find out whether it is right. That is the part worth remembering, not who was wrong, and not who was right, but what it costs, and who pays, when we decide that the surface is enough. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already, subscribe. There are more stories coming about people who carry everything quietly, and the moments the world finally looks up. YouTube title: A CEO humiliated a poor black repairman at her gala. Then her father stood up and saluted him. YouTube description: A CEO humiliated a poor black repairman at her gala. Then her father stood up and saluted him. When the lighting failed minutes before her keynote, Claire Harrington called in an emergency contractor. Marcus Cole arrived through the service entrance, fixed the problem in 11 minutes, and was heading home to his daughter when the CEO stopped him in front of 300 guests. What she said and what happened next is a story about the gap between what we assume and what we miss. This is a story about dignity, about the things we carry quietly, and about the moment the world finally looks up. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, unspoken sacrifice, and the men who never stop showing up. Tags: Dad Chronicles, Single Dad Stories, Black Single Dad, Emotional Storytelling, Inspiring Stories, Undercover Boss, Life Lessons, Black Resilience, Hidden Identity, Justice Stories, Character Stories, Emotional Story, Heartfelt Stories, Single Father, Audio Stories, Veteran Stories.